So, you're an American citizen with a passport in hand, looking to explore the world. Well, there are plenty of places that would love to have you, but not every country is rolling out the welcome mat for US travelers. From historical grievances to political conflicts, these nations might be a bit prickly when it comes to American visitors. While you're smashing that like button and helping us hit 5,000 likes on this video, let's dive into 10 countries where Americans aren't exactly welcome in 2024 and why. 10. North Korea. Kicking off our list is North Korea, which should come as no surprise to anyone familiar with global politics. The relationship between the US and North Korea has been hostile since the Korean War in the 1950s, when the US and its allies fought to defend South Korea from a communist invasion. The conflict ended in an armistice, not a peace treaty, meaning the Korean peninsula is technically still at war. The US continues to maintain a significant military presence in South Korea, and North Korea's government sees the US as its primary adversary. Since 2017, US citizens have been banned from traveling to North Korea without special permission from the US State Department. This came after a series of incidents involving US citizens, most notably the tragic case of Otto Warmbier. Warmbier was a college student who was arrested for allegedly stealing a propaganda poster and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. He was eventually returned to the US in a comatose state and died shortly after due to mistreatment during his imprisonment. 9. Iran. Relations between the US and Iran have been rocky since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which saw the overthrow of the US-backed Shah and the establishment of the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. One of the most infamous incidents in US-Iran relations was the Iran hostage crisis, during which 52 American diplomats and citizens were held captive for 444 days by Iranian revolutionaries. This event still casts a long shadow over the relationship between the two countries. In 2024, while US citizens can technically visit Iran, the process is far from straightforward. American travelers must apply for a visa through a complicated process, and even if granted, they are often required to be part of guided tours where they are monitored closely by government-approved guides, much like in North Korea. This is primarily due to concerns about security, as well as a desire by the Iranian government to control what American visitors see and experience during their stay. 8. Syria. Once home to some of the most ancient and significant archaeological sites in the world, Syria has been ravaged by conflict since the outbreak of civil war in 2011. The war, which has pitted President Bashar al-Assad's regime against various rebel groups and extremist organizations like ISIS, has torn the country apart. The US has played a significant role in the conflict, primarily through airstrikes and support for opposition forces, which has only fueled anti-American sentiment among various factions within the country. The US government has strongly advised against travel to Syria for years, and with good reason. The civil war has left much of the country in ruins, with large areas under the control of rebel groups, militias, or the Syrian government, all of whom are highly suspicious of foreign visitors. In particular, terrorist organizations like ISIS have been known to target Westerners, including Americans, for kidnapping and ransom. 7. Afghanistan. Afghanistan has endured decades of war and instability, much of it involving the US. The US-led invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, launched in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, ousted the Taliban from power and led to a 2-decade-long conflict aimed at combating terrorism and nation-building. However, after years of fighting, the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan in 2021 following the US's withdrawal, plunging the country into a new era of uncertainty and repression. The US government has issued a strong travel advisory against visiting Afghanistan, warning that the risk of terrorism, kidnapping, and civil unrest remains extremely high. Americans, in particular, are at risk due to the long history of US involvement in the country. Many Afghans blame the US. 6. Yemen. Yemen, like many of the countries on this list, has been ravaged by years of civil war and conflict, which began in earnest in 2015. The conflict has drawn in regional powers like Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the US has been indirectly involved through its support for Saudi-led airstrikes and counter-terrorism operations targeting groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP. The US's involvement has led to widespread anti-American sentiment among various factions within the country. The humanitarian crisis in Yemen is one of the worst in the world, with millions of people facing famine and a total collapse of basic services. The U.S. State Department advises against all travel to Yemen due to the high risk of terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. 5. Libya. Libya was once a Mediterranean gem, with tourists flocking to its ancient ruins and stunning coastlines. However, since the fall of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, the country has descended into chaos. Libya is now divided between competing governments and militias, and the ongoing civil war has made it one of the most dangerous places in the world for foreigners. For Americans, Libya is particularly perilous due to the strained relations following the 2012 Benghazi attack, in which the U.S. ambassador and several other Americans were killed. There's currently a Level 4 travel advisory in place for Libya, meaning U.S. citizens are urged to avoid all travel to the country. The risks of terrorism, kidnapping, and violent crime are incredibly high, and many parts of the country are lawless, controlled by militias or terrorist groups. 4. Somalia. Somalia has been in a state of chaos and instability for decades, primarily due to civil war, terrorism, and lawlessness. Since the fall of its central government in 1991, the country has been plagued by ongoing conflict, leaving much of its territory in the hands of militias or extremist groups like Al-Shabaab. This terrorist organization, which has ties to Al-Qaeda, controls large swaths of southern Somalia and is notorious for carrying out attacks against civilians, government targets, and foreign nationals. Al-Shabaab has also been involved in piracy and kidnappings, making the region particularly unsafe for foreign visitors. For U.S. citizens, the risks in Somalia are heightened due to the country's history of violence and anti-American sentiment. The U.S. has conducted airstrikes and military operations in Somalia to combat terrorism, including Al-Shabaab, which has only deepened hostilities. 3. Venezuela. Venezuela was once one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, known for its vast oil reserves and vibrant cities. However, in recent years, Venezuela has descended into severe political and economic crises, which have devastated the country's infrastructure and made it a highly dangerous destination for foreigners, particularly Americans. The strained relationship between Venezuela and the U.S. can be traced back to the late President Hugo Chavez and his socialist policies. Chavez was openly critical of U.S. foreign policy, and the tension between the two nations continued under his successor, Nicolás Maduro. In response to Venezuela's political corruption, human rights abuses, and accusations of election fraud, the U.S. These sanctions are viewed by many Venezuelans as a contributing factor to their nation's economic collapse, leading to widespread anti-American sentiment. For Americans looking to visit Venezuela in 2024, obtaining a visa can be difficult due to diplomatic tensions. Even if you manage to secure entry, the country's high crime rates. 2. Russia. Relations between the U.S. and Russia have deteriorated dramatically in recent years, especially following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. These actions led to severe sanctions from the U.S. and its allies, and in response, Russia has become increasingly hostile toward the West. For American travelers, Russia poses significant risks due to these heightened geopolitical tensions. The U.S. government has issued strong travel warnings for Americans visiting Russia, citing the risks of arbitrary detention, harassment, and increased surveillance. The Russian government often views U.S. citizens with suspicion, and there have been numerous cases of Americans being detained on vague charges, such as espionage or undermining state security. 1. China. Topping our list is China, a country with a long and complex history of relations with the U.S. While millions of Americans still visit China each year to experience its incredible history, vibrant cities, and natural wonders like the Great Wall, political tensions between the two nations have made travel more complicated in recent years. The relationship between the U.S. and China has been strained by several factors, including trade wars, accusations of intellectual property theft, human rights concerns in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, and growing geopolitical competition. There in 2024. We want to thank you for watching this video. If you found this information helpful, make sure to hit that like button and share it with your fellow travelers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest travel guides, tips, and updates on global destinations. We're constantly exploring the world to bring you the best insights and advice to make your journeys as safe and enriching as possible. Let us know in the comments which destinations you'd like us to cover next, and until then, stay safe and keep exploring.